Yeah, I kick off the record. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I pasted statistics, and what I did this time, I really like what you did last time, is to go through all the rotten PRs and try to fish out whatever was rotten unintentionally. So I found 2 PRs that may be rotten unintentionally. So if you can take a look at those and maybe need to reopen and merge them. Both seems pretty safe and useful. They're minor though.
Yeah, thanks, Sergey. And keep us, the community and our PR up to date. And also, I noticed that because we kick out the discussing last week about the probe timeout, and you close all those related of the PR because they are out of state, and also is not aligned with current what we're discussing. So thanks for that effort. So next one, let's follow up. Andrew, I make you the co-host if you want to share anything. So let's move on the topic.
Sure. Can folks hear me okay? I've been having some audio issues this morning. Okay.
I can hear you.
Great.
You're a bit quiet, but we can hear you.
Okay. Let me share my screen. All right. So last week, Sergey and I had brought up the issue around kubelet not respecting exec probe timeouts. And there was a bunch of back and forth, and I don't think we reached an agreement. And so Don had asked me to kind of summarize the state of things and potentially come up with a proposal. And so, you know, at the end of this call, if we can't agree to it, I'm more than happy to put create an official CAP for this so we can discuss this further in the CAP, but ideally we can agree to what's being proposed here. So one source of confusion I found from last week's meeting is that the issue with kubelet today is that it doesn't respect the exec probe timeout, but that doesn't mean that the actual exec timeout is not respected from the actual runtime. And I think that was a source of confusion where people were wondering whether like runtimes like Containerd actually respected the exact timeout. So I'll just go straight into like the current state of things. So with Docker shim, the probe timeout we pass into Docker shim is not respected at all. And so there's some hard-coded logic in there that will run the exec, and then it'll inspect the state of the exec 5 times for 10 seconds. And so after that 10 seconds, any probe that times out is reported as successful. And then in Containerd, or basically like any other implementation of CRI, the timeout we pass into exec is respected. And so after the timeout, the exec process is killed and whatnot. But the kubelet probe worker that is checking the error from the exec probe is not checking the error properly. And so what's happening is that the error is being ignored by kubelet. Any questions so far before I talk about next steps? Okay, so
a quick question, Andrew.
Yeah.
So is Containerd returning a deadline exceeded on timeout right now, or is it returning an exit code? Because in Cryo, when we were like implementing the CRI, we had to make sure and match what the kubelet was expecting, and we had to return, and we were not able to return a gRPC error because that didn't work as expected, and we had to craft the exact response that the kubelet side expected, which was returning an exec error or something. I'll have to check.
Yeah, so I do believe Containerd, and other folks who are more familiar can correct me, but I do believe we are returning deadline exceeded.
Okay.
But then the kubelet has no special checks for deadline exceeded, and so it's just treating it as a standard error, which then the kubelet prober considers that as just like an unknown state and doesn't register it as an actual failure, which is really, that's kind of where the bug is.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'd like to propose is that we merge the current PR that's open, which fixes the exact probe timeout by adding in logic in Docker shim to actually respect the timeout and return a proper error. And then for the remote CRI runtime, it'll check specifically for deadline exceeded and return the proper error that the prober is expecting. And then it's going to also re-enable the EDV tests for both liveness exec probe timeouts and also add a new one for readiness exec probe timeouts so that we can catch this regression for next time. So one concern that was raised was that because of the existing behavior today to like pretty much ignore the timeout, there was some concerns around applications today that rely on this existing behavior, specifically on like liveness probe. Like when kubelet gets upgraded, kubelet might start to aggressively kill those containers because it's now enforcing a default timeout of 1 second. So I'd like to propose that we also add a exec probe timeouts feature gate, which will be GA and on by default from the start, but then it allows users who may run into this issue to disable that behavior if they needed to. And then we would also document in the actions required section for the 120 release notes to say that there was a bug in kubelet that probe timeouts were not respected, and we are now enforcing that timeout. Yeah, that's it. Folks agree, disagree?
Any concern? I kind of agree with the Andrew proposed here. Any concern? Yeah. For community.
Yeah, the only comment I left in the document right now is we need to make sure that when flag is enabled and all behavior is preserved, we still need to notify customers that timeout needs to be adjusted. That like pretty soon this flag will be removed, and they need to make sure that they are ready for this removal.
Yeah, agreed. At the very least, like we should log. Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically just want an error message actionable, and from the customer, and more creative, like the descript what's the problem, and the user can. Yeah, totally agree. That's general requirements for those.
And another question: do you want to preserve the behavior when we keep executing payload on Docker shim without returning when flag is on, or we want to time out but then not fail? What's the ideal here?
Yeah, so I think the right thing to do is return a timeout error, but then allow, like, preserve the existing behavior with Docker shim to let the exec process continue running.
Yeah, I think it needs to be clearly outlined, but I agree with that.
Was this, I guess I'm trying to think back to the history on why this would have been, I guess it was timeout never respected? Is that what I'm hearing? Or did we regress and at some early phase of Kubernetes life, we seek to respect it?
So from
conversation, I'm sorry. So I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I had the same question when I was digging into this, because it surprised me that we never really respected the timeout, and it does seem like, yeah, kubelet never respected exec probe timeouts, and there were multiple PRs over several years that Sergey helped triage, where we were trying to fix the exact same problem, and there was a comment in one of the EDV tests that was skipping this test because Docker shim didn't natively support exec timeouts, even though CRI did.
I guess the thing I'm wondering is the impact of someone who has a really long timeout now, right? We had some kind of default timeout behavior, but now there's nothing that would prevent excessively long exec.
Yeah, I think the default is 0, right? Which is unlimited timeout.
No, I thought the default was 1.
Yeah, default is 1.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Derek, all your concern actually, the question actually addressed. So as far, I also share what I roughly remember in the history, because if I remember correctly, when we first have the CRI, we want to plan to have the respect timeout. The Docker itself don't respect execute sync, if I recall correctly in long. So we do raise that issue. So when we start off the CRI and also containerd work, so we do plan to respect. And so that's why containerd actually the 2 years ago, they do respect. So that's why here I just share from the chat, that's the comment I had in the PR. So we did fix that problem. I remember it's Nantal fix that problem. And in containerd perspective, do respect execute sync timeout. But we also raised that question at the SIG Node we discussed, and we didn't agree on the semantic at that time back then. So that's why the problem it is kind of carried on today. So there's several attempts to fix that problem, but I remember all those issues, the approach of the fix the problem actually is not follow up with the comments because there's the other concern. So
I
even
guess
like
the thing I'm wondering, Don, is do the container runtimes, whether it's containerd or cryo, have a timeout on their end that they basically set as an upper bound?
Yes.
Is that yes for containerd, and do we know what that timeout was?
Yeah, so, from what I saw, containerd does respect the exact timeout. But
do they have an upper limit?
I don't think so.
Yes, we also talked about this last week. We said we have like the really long, like the catch-all type of the timeout at the container level. We don't have that.
Yeah. Do you know, Mernal, if cryo has we hit issues with probes causing reaping problems, honestly. So I'm just trying to map all of these issues back.
So I'm trying to understand, like, so are you asking about a default that is applied, or like we do respect the timeout, but what is the upper bound you're talking about?
Right, if I gave you a timeout of a year, what would you do in cryo?
Oh yeah, we don't try to clip it, we just pass it down.
Okay.
Maybe we should have a value there.
I mean, that seems like maybe like an API concern then, because maybe the API server should reject timeouts that are above some.
Yeah.
So Derek,
it's hard to say that when if you pass 0, the expectation is that there is no timeout, right? Which is basically what we do, right? We set a context timeout based on the amount of time that's passed to us from over the CRI API, unless it's passed with 0, at which point we don't need a context timeout, right? Because the CRI API says if it's 0, then it's unlimited.
Yeah. So that's why, Derek, we did raise that one. I also raised in the PR last week's meeting. So, but that's more like the API, Kubernetes API level, and eventually we'll change the CI. So that the semantic, what kind of the how long, what's the maximum of the timeout value we allow for prob, and we roughly talk about that one, but. For each one, like the liveness and readiness and all the problem, they may have the different requirement. So that's why we are kind of like the punt and then say, okay, can we narrow down the scope and only affix today's problem? And before we reach off that the big problem, like the another level of the API problem and the semantic problem for the Kubernetes.
No, that makes sense. I'm just talking to Renal a little bit in the background, but just trying to think through any negative that could come from this, and it would be.
Yeah, that's a good point, Derek. I mean, I guess the only option would be that the container runtimes provide a Docker, an old Docker behavior via config, right? Unless you want to just continue to drive it from the kubelet perspective.
Yeah, but for what's purpose, I don't have I think it's we need to be right, and so it's a bug that we're not being right here. So I don't object to what Andrew's presenting. I'm just mostly wondering if a runtime might want to clip a maximum time.
What I brought up yesterday is any type of maximum time is very hard, and this should be left up to clients to specify, because a 2-minute max time on a Raspberry Pi is not that long compared to a 10-second max time on a big compute node. So like leave this up as a, or that CRI implementations should just respect what they're told to do and not provide some max.
Yeah, I think that I follow up with the Michael raised that question last week, and I agree on that perspective at the container runtime level. But I think about the Kubernetes at the API level. When we define the prop, we could define the catch-all timeout, and which is not like the default value. Instant maxing. The default value, it is today we do have the default value, which is really hard, like exactly like the Michael raised. But I think about catch-all, like the really relatively long, like 1 hour, instead of like the couple minutes, like 1 hour, and then we don't leave those the running process there, but do kick remove of those remove some like unnecessary deadlock and the non-leaving of the process without any progress. So something like that, so we can reach some agreement. So obviously last week we didn't reach agreement, and so that's why I suggest that Andrew come back and narrow down the scope and fix today's problem. And one clarify from what Michael Brown earlier said, actually the container did when we work on the CRI and the container D, we do try to fix the problem which Docker has, because Docker does respect of the execute thing. Maybe today fixed. I believe it's not fixed. This is why Andrew started this PR at the first place. But the container did fix. The problem it is we didn't fill the gap in the last mileage. So after we fix this at the CRI and the container level, but we didn't really still didn't define that semantic, and for the Kubernetes, and so that's why we just treat that it is as the error, which unknown error, and we didn't handle at the Kubernetes level. So this is what Andrew proposal is, just fix that problem. But then still we have like a semantic at the API level, how we are going to handle for better handle the customer's use cases is unknown yet, it's undefined yet.
Am I not mistaken that this would be bound by the timeout in the remote case, by the timeout on the gRPC connection itself?
Yeah, that should be true.
So there is implicitly some upper limit that would be here. I forget deadline exceeded.
I think the gRPC timeout is appended. There's like a 2-minute max that's appended on top of the probe timeout we passed through. So it's still based on the probe timeout, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, that basically implies there has to be some timeout. We can't go infinity and we can't go days. That's mostly what I was concerned about, is like nodes with large numbers of pods that could abuse a situation. But this seems fine.
Yeah, so I feel like we should discuss the problem with Docker shim in a separate meeting maybe, but Docker shim, like today.
Delete it.
But no, but the problem with Docker shim is that like it completely ignores the timeout. Even with this PR, like for the timeout, it'll return the correct error, but nothing is actually killing the exact process. And so if you have a probe that's very frequent and it times out a lot, like that, like the problem you were referring to earlier, Derek, around like weeping processes, like that'll never get killed. So we should try to address that as well.
Andrew, I think the SIG Node community agree upon and we want to deprecate of the Docker sham as soon as possible. And it takes time, and but that's actually long time back we agree upon. So that's why we put a lot of effort on the CRI and other CRI compatible container runtime. Docker sham, it is kind of the transition a milestone, because we want to the only in production when we have the CRI, or even we have the CRI in Docker, so we have to support Docker. But now we are in the turning point, like we should, because new feature actually most added to the new container runtime, not added to the Docker sham. So we are now to try to make the Docker sham here with the new container runtime for a long time. So that's why right now a lot of the Docker. I just want to share with you some background here.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks. So like one more thing before we end this topic. I think the reason why this was never caught was because when we originally added the exec timeout E2E test, we skipped it because Docker natively didn't support it anyways. And then I don't think we just never remembered to unskip it once we added other implementations.
Six. But Andrew, actually you raised a good point. And currently there's the discussing about Manu, do you want to share something? There's some discussing related to like how to enable off the cryo E2E test to our public SIG Node test grid. And also Sergey actually is looking into how to improve overall cryo tests and also continuity related of the CRI test. So that those kind of all those two efforts can help us to move forward and speed up the deploy of the Docker sham.
Yes, sure. So last on that topic, I know we merged that PR. I'll have to check on Harshal on the status of it. And yeah, I mean, we are definitely up for getting that test in a good state and make it a part of the grid. So if there's any actions or anything, please tag me and Harshal, and we'll follow up. And if there's any meeting we need to attend, we can attend that.
Okay, I think I need to talk to the circuit offline and figure out what's the kind of status about the CRI test in general, and then we can define some like the container runtime. We already have the CRI conform test to some extent, but we need to formalize that one. Then we can say that and come up the deprecation plan for the Docker sham, and then move forward from there.
Are you talking about the cry-CTL level with cry-test or something, a node test?
I think both, because
okay.
I think cryo test, it is good, but there's the certain things is not to cover everything, right? So implementation detail still matters. So that's why we do care about both the container D and the cryo node level E2E test. So we need to define of the full set of the conform test for container runtime. So once we define that one, I think we can really also beyond that one, we can come up with a more clear deprecation plan for our users here for for the Docker share.
I think that sounds good. So like if we have like gaps of tests that we think that should be added, we can probably just make a list and split it up among the community and get those added.
Yeah.
I agree, Murnau. Sounds good.
Yeah.
And for the previous topic, did you agree on proposal from Andrew? Do we need to move it forward?
Mm.
So my understanding is that the next action item is to create a cap for this flag and approve this cap and start implementing it. Is it right?
Do we need a cap for just like a bug fix? I mean, I could put together a cap if we feel like we need to.
I think it's for the flag, right?
Reserve that.
For the introduction of flag.
And that's for the internal version of Docker sham, right? The implementation.
I'm not following. So,
Derek, how do you think? I personally think about this is just for one bug fix. Maybe we don't need a cap on this one.
Yeah, I don't think a cap's needed or anything. I don't even think the feature gate is needed. But I agree with the. It's a useful fallback for unintended behaviors to give people time to update. But I don't see a cap as really being required. I think you might need a cap though if you do a feature gate to get it through the release process, and so it might be the shortest cap that we write because the. I think if you introduce a new feature, get SIG release was tracking if there was a corresponding cap. And so if we do the gate, I think you need the cap, but the cap should be really brief.
Yeah.
Yeah, because cap also drives documentation that needs to be put on a website, right?
Yeah, I ran for the topic I was going to bring up later on empty dir volumes. I think I ended up with the same thought process, which was this. Did it really need a cap? Well, I had a feature gate because I wanted to protect against unintended behavior. So if we write a really short cap, it should be fine.
okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. So Mark also on the chat raised one point, which is actually is the biggest reason we didn't put the effort to deprecate off the Docker sham fast. It is Windows support. That's so true. But even for the Windows support, a lot of new feature we actually added to the containerd. So we the reason we want to start talk about the Docker sham is just because the issue like this coming all the time, and so we add new feature into the containerd, but at the same time and the quell, and but at the same time there's Docker. And we found the new issue and the new bug and the feature parity issue, compatibility issue. So that's why the community keep have the people engineer and try to move Docker sham along with the. So that's kind of the not make us like distract us, and also for the community we have to maintain so many container runtime. So that's why we try to consolidate.
Yeah, I wasn't advocating that we should do any more updates to Docker sham. That was just kind of a historical reason why it hasn't been deprecated yet.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. So let's move to next topic, and Setka content, Setka ordering.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
So since the last time I was here, the PR was merged. I wanted to ask if there are any remaining major concerns about the sidecar. I was planning to, as was suggested in one of the comments of the PR that was merged, to open a follow-up PR, removing the cremation hook and fatal to pod fields that were discussed in the section to discuss the proposal. Yeah, and update the proposal to not change the pod phase as, yeah, we agree it makes sense. And yeah, if there aren't any major concerns, I wanted to ask, yeah, about these two callouts. Basically, one is the time spent to kill a pod, and the other one is how to split the time. But on this callout, there are several alternatives and suggestions. So if we agree with the suggestion, that should be fine. But on the first callout, on the time to kill a pod, there is no alternative proposed. Just the problem is the state. Basically, the problem is the sidecar cap was loosey about some details on how to kill a pod, and the implementation that was created by Joseph Eyring basically unintentionally increased the time to kill a pod by around 3x. So yeah, I was thinking, what is the best way to kill the pod without increasing the time 3x?
So for the the use cases that were driving this, right? A lot of them around service meshes and wanting, I'm assuming, to gracefully drain traffic from that mesh. We have an idea of like
the
anticipated.
My use case is not so much driven for a service mesh, but like I try to get in touch with every party is interested, and that's why it's brought up. But sorry, what was your question, Dork?
I was just curious if we knew from the clients who were targeting this behavior what they would anticipate as representative shutdown times.
Sorry, what was representative shutdown times for what? Like, I'm not sure I followed, sorry.
For the how to split the shutdown time to kill different types of containers question.
Okay, for the other question. Yeah, I think the suggestion there is basically to say like we may take 4 seconds to kill a pod and do the same behavior that we're doing now. What we're doing right now that we don't have sidecars is we send sync term and we wait for a minimum of 2 seconds. And what I'm proposing to do with sidecar is to do the same first for non-sidecars and then for sidecars, so it would be 4 seconds. The alternative here, it says 6 seconds because it's taking into account that we add a termination hook thingy, but if we don't add that, 4 seconds should be enough. Does it make sense, Dork, for you?
Yeah, I'm just refilling my cache on what alternative 4 was.
Yeah, so yeah, alternative 4 was that was basically you have the termination grace period for the pod or the deletion grace period, whatever is lower. Let's call it grace time. Basically, you allow you go and try to kill the non-sidecars, but if that fails, you like if they don't finish on time, you send sig kill and then you send sig term to the sidecars with 2 seconds of a minimum. So it's basically the same, but now we have 2 types of containers, sidecars and non-sidecars or standard. Yeah, the current behavior is you send sig term, or like you try to kill it, and if it doesn't finish, you send sig kill after the whole period with a minimum of 2 seconds.
I'm going to have to reread the various links here, and I apologize. My mental brain power right now, just taking back from break, is not as strong as I'd like it to be. But I'll comment on the doc.
Yeah, Derek, last time you mentioned that there may be concern about injection pods, and maybe some service mesh team in Red Hat knows better way with CNI. Do you still want to have this meeting, discuss it? I discussed with the Istio team in Google, and they believe that injection of pods will be here with us for a long time. So if we need to discuss further, we can do it.
Yeah, I still need to follow up with our mesh team, but for the particular questions, like I just remember this was a long cap, so I'll have to reread each alternative to say like which we want to go forward on. But maybe Rodrigo, if you wanted to update the cap with the definitive choices, and we can just iterate on that PR, that would be the right next step.
Okay. Yeah, so for all the alternatives that have, for all the things that we want to discuss, but that have a suggestion, I update the cap to reflect that. And we discuss it in that PR.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. And how do you want to do with this callout that doesn't have an alternative? The one on time to kill a pod. Should I create a PR with a small div there so it's easy to comment on that?
Well, this was the original core issue on how it could take 3 times as long. I'm in the interest of time, like I don't want to sit here and reread to forget to relearn what I forgot. But I think if you wanted to update this with your definitive recommendation, if you have more time to think on it, let's just do that.
Yeah, it's. I'm not so sure. Like, maybe I can ask more specific question, or if you have.
I think maybe it's a good idea here will be to have a known issues section, and there we can have a PR saying termination time will maybe increase 3 times, and then on this PR we can comment and discuss.
Yeah, on the alternatives. Okay.
It wouldn't be alternative. It would be just a statement, the fact that termination time may be increased 3 times, and we know about it. So it's kind of known issues section. Well, I don't think we have an alternative.
Well, I think we need an alternative because basically what we agreed like in May or something like that is that we don't want to move forward with this to merge this in, like, to move it to beta stage until the kubelet graceful shutdown is there. Basically, to interact correctly, we have been meeting with the guys working on that, and to interact correctly, what we would want is to respect the time that is set by the kubelet.
Was the only option to fix the killing pods taking 3 times the time was to provide a per container period?
No. Sorry, maybe the document is too long. So maybe I can share this link on Zoom, but give me 1 second. Yeah.
I'm sorry, the alternative 4 was the answer to the question on how long to take. I'm getting confused on the links across.
Okay.
This call out on time to kill a pod, no suggestion alternative here. It looked like alternative 4 was the actual suggestion. Am I confused?
Yes, sorry, my Spanish came up.
Okay.
Yes, alternative 4 is for how to split the time when killing the containers on a pod. Right now I was talking on the time to kill a pod is being increased 3 times. What I got, what I understood is like do a PR and with the suggestions, and we can discuss them. And this is why I was talking about this callout, because it doesn't have any suggestion.
So my understanding is
Sergey earlier. Go ahead, Sergey.
Yeah, my understanding is that there are 2 issues. First issue is how to split time to fit into given time period, and this is like a 4 seconds proposal, and we have a proposal that can be commented on. And another one is the time will increase 3 times just because the nature of feature that we implement. As a natural feature, we want waved termination. So we have first wave and second wave, and that's why termination may take longer. So I don't think we have proposal to address this like second problem. So second problem is just known issue for me. And for first,
no, the second problem is not that, though. The second problem is it's an implementation detail. The thing is, the function kill container ignores the grace period override parameter for the press-to hooks. So basically, when you're calling it, you're calling it now like 2 times at least, and then basically you are calling the press-to hook 2 times, and that can take up to the termination grace period to run the press-to hooks. So this is an implementation detail that kill container is ignoring grace period override for some things, but changing it might not be backwards compatible. An issue was created for this, but we didn't get a clear answer on how to proceed. Then one option would be to use the pod deletion grace period seconds, that this is respected by the kill container function. But I wanted to have confirmation that it's possible to set this, because the code assumes it might not be always set or things like that. But yeah, maybe I can move this to known issues or whatever, and we can comment on the PR there.
That sounds good.
Okay. Yes, sorry for the delay. So I was trying to aim this for Kubernetes 120, but I'm not sure if we all feel comfortable with it. And yeah, how do you think? What do you think about it?
I think the first step to get it into 120 is that we get the kept done by the enhancement freeze. So
yeah, that's October 5 or something like that.
Okay. So I guess for our next step, if we can make those updates, and we'll try to sync on it again next week, we can then see where we are about getting in 120.
Okay, sure. Thank you. That's all for me.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. Around the whole pre-stop hook not respecting the time, for like the shutdown stuff, I think it would be ideal actually, and just for the sidecar, maybe if you can answer, it'd be good. Like just in general, would it be helpful if the timeout would be respected by pre-stop hook? Is that something we actually want? It sounds kind of similar to the first issue we discussed earlier today in the meeting around the probe timeouts not being respected.
Sorry. So yes, I think it will be helpful, but yeah, I'm not sure if we can change it. There's a tricky thing, because the kill container function takes a pointer to an int with the grace period override, and this is what it doesn't really respect. But as far as I've been looking at the code, the grace period override is a parameter that is always nil. The pointer there is always nil. So I think it might be safe to just change it and yeah, and do that. Because the grace period override like seems like if you do kubectl delete pod minus grace period and you set something, I would expect that to be set, but it isn't set there. It's at least since Kubernetes 1.17, what it does is updates the pod deletion grace period to the time you specify there. So that parameter seems unused and yeah, all the call size that I checked were nil, but I'm not sure if something over the network might set it.
Got it. I see. Cool. Yeah, I'm just thinking like maybe it makes sense for us to kind of consider, similar to the first case with the exec or sorry, the probes not, timeouts not being respected. Something like we also make a release node or something and start respecting the timeouts for pre-stop hooks, because it seems like that was also kind of a long-standing bug type of thing.
Yeah, makes sense for me to proceed. Like I can do that, and then in the following PR propose that, if it makes sense for other folks here.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt it because for
yeah.
the time. And we can follow up on the PR, and I believe there's more issue documentation, all this kind of thing, and also enhancement. So I need to follow on the PR and the CAP. And we have thank you. And we have the 3 more topic. Derek, do you want to talk about the this one?
This one's really quick. It was we're having more users use Kubernetes on larger node sizes, and this was an issue that got brought to my attention from one of our AI-oriented teams. That the background was that the size of a memory-backed empty dir is getting defaulted to the 50% of the available memory on the Linux host, and this produced less than desirable outcomes when pods used more memory and wanted larger empty dirs than that 50% ratio. So I put a PR out there that basically changed the behavior to be the size of the empty dir memory backed volume was this defaulted to the size of the allocatable memory available to that pod. So if the pod had memory limits in all its containers, it mapped to the C group value that was enforced on the pod C group. And if it didn't have a bounded memory limit at the pod level, it got bound to the node allocatable level. And then for the scenarios where people wanted to partition memory to be less than that on the size of the empty dir, it goes and respects the size limit field for empty dir volumes to let you size it lower. And I put that behind a feature gate because I wasn't sure for earlier discussion if people would hit unknown unknowns when rolling that out and seeing sizes of empty dirs either grow or shrink accordingly. I don't know if other people were hitting similar issues, but I was just trying to help push a topic forward. And I think, David, you reviewed it, and I don't know if he's on the call, but I still have to add some unit testing and EDEs, but just wanted to draw attention if there was any negatives or alternatives that people had run into with empty dir volumes that they wanted to raise.
Hi, Derek. This was an old problem. It's been lingering for a really long time. So thanks for shining the light. I reviewed both the KEP and the PR, and it looks really good. The last one that I saw was the medium memory needed to be checked. That was one of the comments.
Yeah, putting hacks on it. Yeah, thanks, Dims. And the only reason I threw a new PR out there was the original PR was dated back to 2018, and I know both David and myself had given feedback and hadn't seen that adjusted. So I was just trying to help kick the can forward. But if the original author is watching the recording for who did the first one of that PR, thank you for raising the topic to the community.
Yeah, the only question I had was around the language of the description of the field itself, and you already commented that it matches the implementation, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thanks, Derek. And let's move to next topic. Alexei, is that you to propose that topology related?
No, it's me. Hey, hello.
Hey.
It's Francisco. Hey, hello. So very quick, it will take a minute. So in the context of the topology we're scheduling, we are identified a couple of extensions to the pod resource API. So we posted the caps, and links are in the notes, in the meeting notes. So please review, because we, if possible, we will really like to have those extensions ready for 1.20, but please just review, and so we can keep them progress. Thanks.
Thanks. So the last one topic, it is from the cat. Sorry, I might pronounce your name wrong.
Yes,
Oh,
it's me.
okay.
So I also will be very quick. Last week we mentioned about this downwards API, and I was hoping to make it well, a short presentation, but when I realized there are a lot of discussion going on in multiple subgroups, and we had meeting with Eric, with Michael Crosby, and so we practically end up with a list of ideas. What after some discussions and after synchronization between multiple projects might end up with several caps to Kubernetes, to Containerd, to CRI-O, and others. It's not yet finalized list, but we published it for work in progress notes. I posted a link in the meeting minutes. Everyone welcome to read, comment, and so on.
Cool. Thanks. So Alexander, last week we mentioned that we are going to follow up about the resource request and limit related of the downward API. So it looks like we are not, we haven't, there need more discussing and to present before presenting to this group.
Yes.
Is that true? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it's, if we start to touch one thing, we found out what it will start touching other things. So,
yes.
So for example, Derek created a PR which adds the huge pages to a set of possible scenarios with existing downward API. But it completely not supporting all extended resources. And if pod or container wants to consume extended resources, there is no way to get it from kubelet. So we need to, well, downwards API was one thing, and second thing were runtimes. I interested to get the extended resources as well. When if we look at in overall resources for what is passed down to the runtimes, we have a similar problem with VM-based runtimes. So for VM-based runtimes, on the time when the sandbox or pod is created, it would be good to get in the lower layers information about all the container resources. So how many, like, will it be init containers? Do we have how many containers it will be in this pod? How much resources is requested and limits for this thing, for this pod? Because when we can properly create the VM, which will fit appropriately containers, and so on. So it started to, while we started to discuss, it started to grow like a snowball. So we want to have probably some ad hoc discussions and before we present something.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Eric, you have some comment, right? So
yeah, when we did the pod overhead cap, one of the things that we included and kind of nodded at was the need to it would be good to pass the information down with respect to what the pod overhead values are through to the CRI runtime. But that didn't get done. There wasn't an immediate use case for it. And as we dig into this a little bit more and how to do more optimal CPU utilization on the host, it becomes apparent that it's important that the runtime itself is able to have this information. So So that's a kind of a part of what Sasha's saying, and yeah, the whole sandbox level information would be great. It's a bit naive, you know, because these things could change if vertical auto scaling things like this, but at least the overhead is necessary.
Yeah. I personally have I share here, and I personally very interested into the downward API here. It is because I do see some use cases. The customer could understand their limit. Of course, today they still could do those kind of things by read the C group value directly. But they don't.
Not, as we figured out, it's not always the case. So with C group, you will see the limit imposed only for the container. But for example, like with huge pages, we realized what it's enforced on the pod level, which was also BG from Samsung also mentioned a couple of months ago. And this is not visible.
Exactly. I just about to say that. That's exactly the issue today we have. And so for some application, actually they have different thread and different processes. So they may want to wisely manage that through the sub C group. I never raised this one because we do have I do see some use cases like that, but I never give to customer suggest because it's just hard. Today's Kubernetes, the way support. I just share with everyone here, and this is why I'm really interested on that one. But since no customer really ask for, it's just like the one way we could handle for certain application sensitive, the performance sensitive application, they could do better job at the app level. Since we talk about the downward API for the resource, so that's why I want to raise this is particularly use cases I can see I can help the customer to do better job.
So in the huge project I had, the idea was that any native resource that Kubernetes understood, this should be a valid candidate for downward API. I have no real objection to having a mechanism to provide any extended resource also down through the downward API. That would just be a thing we need to get a proposal on. So to me, it's no different than how Quota only originally supported resources that Cube understood, and then we added like generic object count quotas. So if you had use cases, Alex, on wanting to get everything through the downward API, I think a cap on that would be great.
Yeah,
caps will be following after we end up actually in agreement what we want to get. But for my example with extended resources, it's not only to know them inside the container, but also pass it down to the runtime level. So for example, our custom version of RunC can set the limits of GPU memory usage. So it's not standard yet, but at least we can export as an extended resource, and when we can set it in the kernel.
Yeah, that's maybe a redefinition of the downward API in my view. Like to me, the downward API was a way of letting a container operational environment understand its confines better, and what you're describing is a way of the sandboxer understanding that better. Maybe we need new language for that.
Yeah, as I said, as we start to discuss one usage scenario, we figured out what there are a lot of connected areas.
Cool.
Okay, so thanks both Derek and the Alex. And yeah, Malu, I saw your comment to the R limit. And if we're ready, maybe you can give a demo next week or the following week, and then we can talk. Yeah, I agree with you. The R limit, they always have the kernel issues in the past. That's why we didn't serious the support. Okay, we can carry on the discussing. And yeah, that's all for today. And thanks everyone for attending today's meeting. And this is really good discussing. and we need to follow up to several things and include the sidecar ordering and also the timeout value for the prop and also like the downward API for the resource. So looking forward next week. Bye-bye, everyone.